From the heart of our nation's capital, here's Family Research Council President Tony Perkins.
As we talked about extensively yesterday, Parler over the weekend, appearing to be the victim of a coordinated effort from the big tech giants, was booted off the servers of Amazon. Their app was taken down by Apple, Google removing them, and so now they're looking for a home. It appears they may have found one. Join me now to talk more about the tech giants and how they're curbing free speech and what the future looks like is the Washington Examiner's Doug McKelway. Doug, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thank you, Tony. Good to hear from you again.
Well, good to have you on the program, Doug. Thanks so much for joining us. So what's the latest on Parler?
Well, they remain in limbo. If you try to log on to it, you get a screen, an opening screen that says, it seems that we are either over capacity or you are experiencing a poor network connection. I did a piece on this yesterday for the Examiner, and I started that piece off with that scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the astronaut who's in his little pod outside the spaceship, the mothership, says, "Open the pod bay doors, Hal." And Hal, of course, being the supercomputer which controls everything, responds, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that." And I don't know if it was a perfectly apt analogy, but it sort of reminded me of where we are right now with these platforms being shut down by big tech. And it's not just Parler that's being affected, and the big tech companies who are imposing these kinds of restrictions, these kinds of censorships include Google, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Apple, and Pinterest. I suspect there's probably more than that, but that's the ones I was able to track down yesterday.
So, Doug, some reports out that Parler may be in conversations with a host. I think it's called Epic. I'm not sure. EPIK. Is there any truth to that?
I hadn't seen that. I'm sure they're on the lookout for some other, some other entity that can provide servers that protects them from this kind of censorship. I know that the CEO of Parler did an interview with Fox News over the weekend in which he said it would take a week or so for them to get back up. I believe he mentioned the number of 600 servers which produce the product that Parler uses, so they would need to replace that. It's not an easy endeavor, but it's one that certainly can be undertaken. I also took an interesting look at a tweet from having a senior moment right here, the Tesla owner, Tesla creator, Elon Musk, who is a vehement critic of what's going on with big tech these days and this kind of censorship. And he says it should not be happening. It so happens that Elon Musk is the world's richest man, so he's certainly in a position to create his own infrastructure that would allow for the exercise of free speech.
Now, Doug, I think I saw a piece you did earlier today, a report you did for the Washington Examiner that suggests that there are some alternative ideas that are out there in laboratories, some of them being launched, that could provide really a strong competition to Twitter.
Yeah, in fact, I did an interview with David Galerter, who is a Yale computer scientist, but he's much more than that. In fact, I sought him out because I've read a couple of his books. He's a brilliant man who was very much instrumental in the creation of cloud computing and other sweeping architectures of the modern age, of the digital age. He's also a huge appreciator of the arts, of philosophy, has broad knowledge. He's a big thinker. So I intentionally sought him out, and I was very thankful that he agreed to do an interview with me. And he said that they are working at Yale University on new technology that would involve blockchain. And I'm not familiar with the details of blockchain. But if I can find what he told me exactly, I have the piece up here in front of my face. He said that, he said basically that they're working on new technology that would allow individual internet users to be the proprietors of their own information. It would be secure. It would belong to you. This is what blockchain would enable, and they're working on it at Yale University. It would be a version of Twitter, for example, but much more powerful, he said. And there are other universities and other consortiums which are working on this kind of thing. He said it would take, a really well-endowed, rich guy, somebody with very deep pockets, and anywhere up to 25 really good computer programs and several months, but it could be done. And I think that's what the future holds. So I don't think this is a permanent state of affairs with this kind of censorship. But it certainly is daunting. It's intimidating, and I don't like it one bit.
Well, Doug, we hear a lot of talk about the monopolies that these big tech companies have, and as you look at what has happened here to Parler, it certainly would look like this is a coordinated effort to knock them off with tactics that speak of predatory practices and monopolies. That can only last a certain amount of time, and especially in a free capitalistic society, someone is going to move in where they can eventually make money if the playing field is made a little more level.
Right, and that's the key. Will the playing field be made level? We've got the Democrats coming into control. They're going to control both houses of Congress and the White House. Big tech tends to be very closely aligned with the Democratic Party. I believe Fox News had something this morning that had a full screen graphic, and I'm not a numbers guy, so I don't remember the numbers, but the contributions that big tech companies paid to the Democratic Party as opposed to the Republican Party were so wholly lopsided. It's a very key sign where their hearts and minds lie on the political spectrum. So we've got to watch out for what happens in the first few months, I think, of the Biden administration and with Democratic control of Congress. There are some encouraging signs, I think. I hope that most Americans come to their senses and realize that while this is not a violation technically of the First Amendment, which is pertains to government,
right,
it is a violation of our free speech rights. Tony, you may not know this, but I'm sitting in my office here at home with all these boxes of correspondence written by my grandfather, who was editor of the Evening Star newspaper in Washington during its heyday, when it was the primary newspaper in Washington. He was also the president of the Associated Press, and he was a very powerful defender of the First Amendment during the Cold War years, during the McCarthy days, during the fear of the Soviet Union. And he wrote about the First Amendment, that the idea of some policeman sitting in judgment of the First Amendment and of free speech is untenable. It's antithetical to the idea of free speech and the First Amendment itself. And he wrote that it's incumbent upon publications, upon newspapers, and now, of course, moving into the digital age, which did not exist back then, incumbent upon individual publishers to exercise their rights responsibly. And there's a message in that for today's digital age. A lot of these guys are not being responsible overseers of their technology, and algorithms won't do it. Algorithms cannot have the kind of judgment that individual human beings who are morally grounded have. And that's what seems to be lacking here. There are excesses on all of these websites. Twitter, even Parler has some pretty hateful stuff on it. And you can't accept that, I suppose. But I hearken back to the days of newspapers when editors would look at editors to the letters to the editor and would verify these things. They would make sure that you had to use your name. They checked on your address, make sure you were a real living human being, and that you believed in what you stood for, and that you would be willing to attach your name to your opinion. We have to move down that road, I think. But how it's done on such a massive scale, which exists in the digital age, is a very, very difficult question. I am of the belief that algorithms cannot design it because they don't have the philosophical and the moral grounding of sane human beings.
Right, and the criteria that's being used, even as they put human eyes on it, is what they call objectionable, Well, that's not been the standard of free speech. It's just because you object to it that it can be silenced. And I agree with you that when you talk about the First Amendment, it is talking about the government. So these are private companies, but these private companies have become virtual public squares, and their actions threaten the freedom of speech. And they've been given the leverage to do that by their protected status by the government. And the government has a right to look at that.
They absolutely do. And you started off your show today, and I know you're going to have a guest who speaks to this later, that we went through this before at the turn of the 20th century with the robber barons, with Standard Oil, with the railroad companies. They became monopolies. Yeah. And the government thought they had extended their reach too far.
Well, and the people pushed back. And that's what led to reform in the first part of the 20th century. And I think look, if you know history, you can kind of be prepared for what is occurring. And I think that's a part of our challenge, is that we don't really know our history. These upcoming generations
That's so true.
Need to teach them. Doug,
yes.
we're up against a break. I want to thank you for joining us. As always, great to talk with you. Thanks for coming on the program today.